Welcome back to another episode of Miller's Movers. Plenty to get through this week, plenty that caught my eye last week that have got nice handicap marks going forward. We'll get onto those later. But first, we should start with the weekend's action. A really good weekend of racing. If you didn't enjoy this, then I think jumps racing probably isn't for you. We should touch, of course, on the Morgiana hurdle in Ireland, Lossiemouth winning over 2 miles. We didn't learn anything new about her other than that she's still fit and well. She can jump, she can gallop. And I do think that perhaps post-race comments from Willie Mullins where he suggested that she was his number one in the division does perhaps give hope to the idea that we might get to see her in the champion hurdle this year. I certainly hope we do. I think it would be a waste to see her go and bag another mare's hurdle. So there's hope that that might happen yet, but we didn't learn anything new about her ability and her suitability for 2 miles in the Morgiana. The big action in the UK certainly happened on Saturday, and it's centred really around horses that might have aspirations to be King George horses going forward. Ascot in the 1965 chase, Jango Baie won what was quite a tactical race, I felt. The tempo changed throughout the race, but turning in, Jango Baie quickened up really smartly, sprinted home, as he had done in fairness when winning the Arkle. That came over 2 miles when he came from a long way off the pace. He wasn't as far back on this occasion, although I do think he perhaps was the beneficiary of the most efficient ride through the race. Certainly plenty of pace on. Ile Francais tried to force it, as did Pitt Dory. Gidley Park was never far away. Ile Francais, well, he was bitterly disappointing, and I think you could have expected that. He's started to look a shadow of what he'd hoped he might have been as a novice. Quite simply now, when he gets headed, when he can't dictate, he doesn't seem to enjoy it as much. And I also think he still clearly has a few physical problems that they're yet to iron out. And I know he's only 7, but I think that retirement perhaps can't be too far away, though he has been given an entry in the King George this morning. Gidley Park, he ran really well in his return. He's a giant horse. He's been beset with trouble throughout his training for Harry Fry. So I think it's reasonable to assume that there's probably a little bit left to come from him fitness-wise. I'd love to see him over 3 miles, but I do think that Harry Fry is sort of the opinion that he's a strong stayer at this sort of trip, and 3 miles isn't his trip. I slightly disagree. I think he's got a great big stride. He jumps really well. I know he disappointed in the Albert Bartlett when trying 3 miles over hurdles, but that came at the back end of the season. He was a big raw horse, and we just know that race doesn't suit that type of horse. And as for Pitt Dory, he ran well, but I think there was proof here that if he can't get his own way out in front, he's not quite the same horse. So Jango Baie's got a new mark now of 165. I think he's deserving of that mark. It was an impressive performance. I would just suggest to not take that form entirely literally. I don't think Pitt Dory has run bang to his mark. Ile Francais certainly hasn't. Gidley Park, I think, has got a bit more to give. But Jango Baie is now bang in their picture for the King George. Certainly of the UK horses, I'd have him top of the list. The other one we should talk about as a King George contender from the UK is the Jukebox Man. He won a graduation chase at Haydock. I know some people don't like these races, but I'm sure as trainer and connections, you absolutely love them because it's a chance to give this horse, who was 2 from 2 last season, winning at Newbury and then winning the Quarto Star at Kempton on Boxing Day before being beset by injury, gives him a nice introduction. He went very easily indeed. I thought he was slightly more manageable in his sort of racing style this time than he was certainly at Newbury last year, where he was very flamboyant. Here he travelled nicely, but he didn't over-race. He jumped well without being stupidly exuberant, did jump out to his left, as he had done at Newbury, and won very comfortably. But I think you have to factor in that both Iroko and the third place horse, Mr. Hope Street from Dan Skelton's yard, they were in there to pick up prize money. They didn't want to be winning that race. It was very obvious up the home straight that John O'Neill Jr. in particular was trying very hard to let Ben Jones go on and sort of put the race to bed. So it's not a formula you can take literally, but again, a bit like Lossiemouth and Ireland, it shows that Jukebox Man is back, he's fit, he's healthy. He jumped well. Like I say, he did jump out to his left, and I opposed him in the Quarto Star last year on the basis that he would jump out to his left, and he didn't. He jumped gun barrel straight at Kempton when going right-handed, so there's every chance that he'll do the same again in the King George. Whether this mark of 154 that he's now got from the handicapper is going to sort of put him in the mix for the King George, I'm not so sure. I think he's going to have to step up. And I think sometimes we can get carried away by horses that travel well and jump well and want them to be better than they are. I think he's got a bit more to find yet. Of course, he's open to plenty of improvement, just 3 chase starts. He's won all 3. But he won't get his own way in the King George. He'll have to work a bit harder to get that nice rhythm. And we've seen time and time again around Kempton, horses going up in class and up in gear just find things a little bit harder. So at the moment, of those two I've just spoken about, Jango Baie would be comfortably ahead of the Jukebox Man for me. Also in the 3 mile division, but not a contender for the King George after running badly last year when trying going right-handed, is Grey Dawning. He was a very easy winner of the Betfair Chasers put up by myself and Tom on the Thursday podcast. And to be fair, he won this as you expected he should. And it was a cheeky ride by Harry Skelton, keeping hold of him right down to the last. Never particularly comfortable to watch if you're a backer, because if you lose a bit of momentum at the last, it can put a bit of egg on your face. But he won very cosily indeed. He looked like he had plenty left under the tank. But again, a little bit like Jango Baie's performance, whilst it was impressive visually, I think you do just have to give a little bit of context. Royal Pagaille will be turning 12 in the new year. He was racing on good to soft ground here. He's at his best on far slower ground than that. Heavy ground season to best effect. And he was the only one able to challenge. Handstands, as we said on the podcast, is not a horse I've been particularly on board with. I think he's flattered to Steve on a number of occasions, and certainly when going up in grade, he's never really been able to give his running. So I think there's every reason to think this was a strong performance. It certainly was. It was an excellent piece of training by Dan and Harry Skelton, who continue to just pick off these big pots. But I certainly wouldn't have Grey Dawning as a Gold Cup contender. I'd be slightly suspicious about his stamina over that trip. I think if they go to Cheltenham, they might look to go towards the Ryanair, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if they skip Cheltenham altogether and ended up going to Aintree. I know they've said that they're going to train for a Gold Cup, but I think this season, particularly Dan Skelton's training with a really wise head, and he might just concede as they get towards March and the spring festivals that maybe Aintree might be a chance to pick up a really good pot with a fresh horse and take on horses that have gone the Gold Cup route. So that was the staying chase division and the sort of King George picture from a UK perspective this weekend. But the best race of the weekend came from Ireland on Sunday, the John Durkan from Punchestown. Only really involved 2 horses. And we talked plenty about how Irish racing is better because it has bigger fields and more in-depth racing. Well, that might have been the case in the John Durkan with plenty of runners, but really only 2 mattered from some way out. Gaelic Warrior took the lead under Paul Town, and Paul Town said afterwards that the horse went forward and he's not the sort of horse you argue with. Built up a big lead thanks to some really exuberant jumping, strong galloping. Looked to maybe be getting a little bit tired down the back straight. He got a little bit low at 5 out and 4 out. But perhaps in hindsight, that was a blessing because it meant Paul Tanner could grab hold of him, fill his lungs up. And Factor File, who looked to get the more efficient ride under Mark Walsh, was some way off at halfway and started to sort of pick into that lead, turning in, looked like he was going to be the challenger and would only have to sort of be opened up to go past the tiring Gaelic Warrior. Went down to the last. Factor File landed in front, and then somehow Gaelic Warrior found plenty in reserve. Now, Gaelic Warrior's been called some names in the past. I've never really thought of him as ungenuine. I've just thought of him as a bit of a character and a bit of an enigma. He does like to wander around. I've never really questioned his heart in a battle. Quite interestingly, Adam Mills, who we've had on here a few times, sort of posed me a question yesterday. Is Factor File a bit soft in a finish? And he sort of cited that a couple of times last season when coming to challenge Galopin Des Champs, when it really came down to it, he hadn't gone through with it. And he sort of pointed to the fact that maybe when eyeballed by Gaelic Warrior, Factor File didn't find as much as you would want. It was a good question, and it got me thinking. I watched it back. I'm not sure that's the case. I think he doesn't really stay 3 miles, and that's why Galopin Des Champs was able to beat him this year. And when you watch John Durkan back, 2 strides after the line, Factor File is coming back again. So I don't think that it was lack of heart and tenacity that was missing. I think he just bumped into a very good Gaelic Warrior on the day. Now, the question is, which of those is going to go towards the King George? It looks like being Gaelic Warrior. And then the question is just how tough was this race? It did look to be a fair battle from some way out. I saw someone point out quite rightly that neither jockey really used their stick until after the final fence, so maybe there was a little bit left in the petrol tank for each. And I would just also add in that a number of times in my punting history, I've opposed Willie Mullins' horses on the basis that they look to have had a heavy race last time out, and particularly at this time of the season, he does seem to be able to get them back and fighting fit on what is a fairly short turnaround of 4.5 weeks before the King George. So Gaelic Warrior, I think, has got the pole position. And just to put some context on that, he's got a rating of 174. Factor File got a rating of 173. And then we're talking about Jango Baie on 165. So he's got plenty to find yet. And as for the Jukebox Man on 156, he's got well upwards of a stone, I would think, that he's got to find to get into the King George picture if the Irish horses arrive in their best form. Into the handicap movers and shakers now. So as you know by now, Tuesday morning is when the horses get their marks readjusted. Horses that have had 3 runs over hurdles get their opening mark. And we'll start by going back to the 3rd day of the Paddy Power Cheltenham meeting on the Sunday. The Greatwood Hurdle was the feature race of the day, won by Alexei for Joe Tizard, Brendan Powell. He won very easily indeed. I said at the time that he was one of the first off my list. I didn't think he was going to want soft ground despite his German pedigree, but he seemed to cope with the slow ground perfectly well. Absolutely sluiced up. Handicapper was certainly pressed. He's bumped him up £13 to a mark of 147. I think this is the sort of horse that I'll be opposing from now on in. You could argue that he still looks well handicapped, and given that he won very easily, but I think it was a particularly poor renewal of the Greatwood Hurdle, particularly when you view it through the last couple of renewals. So I'll be opposing Alexei going forwards now for a mark of 147. I completely understand that some people might argue that he's still got a bit of juice in his mark, but for me, he's the sort of horse that, having jumped up the handicap early in the year, going into these big field handicaps now in the middle of the winter, I think he's the sort of horse who'd be shorter in the market, and there might be some value in it taking him on. Also going up in the handicap is Excello. He won at Warwick. He was a Miller's Movers after his seasonal return, his chase debut at Worcester, where he shaped really well over 2 mile 4, went very exuberant on that occasion. I suggested a drop back in trip would suit. They duly dropped him back in trip to 2 miles at Warwick, and he put in a really nice jumping performance. Warwick is a decent test of jumping. He got all those fences down the back. Rhythm is important, and he won very easily indeed. He's gone up £7 now to a mark of 128. That is, of course, going to demand more, and on his hurdling form, he's going to have to step forward. But I always think the novice chasers, particularly at this time of year, and he is an exceptional jumper, and he can go a real good gallop, he will always get plenty of novices in trouble just by virtue of his jumping alone. Jane Williams' yard rocking along really well, 30% strike rate. If he's turned out this side of Christmas, providing he's not up against a real superstar in the novice ranks, I think he's going to take plenty of stopping at around 2 miles. He might even stay a bit further now that he's got a bit of freshness out of him with those 2 runs under his belt, but this new mark of 128 I don't think will be stopping Excello. Another that was flagged up after his return run this season at Chepstow was High Tea. I said that he physically caught my eye in the paddock. He shaped really well over 2 miles on that occasion. He then went to Stratford, a sharp track, over 2 miles, and again stayed on quite nicely. Got an opening mark of 105. I thought that was a very workable mark if he was upped in trip. They ran him over 2 mile 4 at Chepstow in a competitive looking hurdle for the grade, but he took the race apart. He got to the front very easily indeed. He's got an £8 rise now to a mark of 113. But I don't think that will stop him. And I think on the times as well, he would suggest that maybe the ground at Chepstow, described as soft, wasn't actually riding as slow as that. And this is a horse, he's a big horse, big knee action. He's definitely going to appreciate slower ground. Kim Bailey and Matt Nichols do really well with these type of embryonic chasers. And I think there'll be plenty more races to be won with High Tea, particularly through the middle of the winter on slow ground. Another who's been good from Miller's Movers is the Neil Mulholland trained Reinardo. He was a next best when winning at Uttoxeter last Saturday. Really well placed by Neil Mulholland, though that was a conditional riders race. He had future entries. He rocked up to Chepstow on Friday, where he was able to run off an unchanged mark of 93, £14 well in. He went off a very short price on that occasion. I think it was 2 to 5. So I don't imagine many of you backed him on the second start. Hopefully you did on Uttoxeter when he was put up as the next best. He's now up to this mark of 107. So effectively, the handicapper felt that he ran to a mark of 107 on Friday. So he's only had 1 race. He could have effectively gone up again. I don't think that's going to stop him. He's a strong travelling horse on slow ground. He'll cope with heavy ground through the depths of the winter. There's plenty of those sort of handicap hurdles over 2 miles around Chepstow. He clearly likes that track. Neil Mulholland will place him well. I expect he'll get freshened up now. But through the Christmas period, when the racing can dilute a little bit because everyone wants to have runners around those 3 or 4 days around Christmas and New Year, I wouldn't be at all surprised if Reinardo was able to win off this new elevated mark of 107. Also winning well at Chepstow was Ben Solo for Rebecca Curtis, whose yard have taken a little while to catch form this season. He won off a mark of 117 up to 2 mile 4, having shaped really promisingly on his seasonal return over 2 miles. Jumped very soundly under Jamie Brace, £5 claimer, who's getting along well with Rebecca Curtis. It's up £6 now to a mark of 123. He will also cope with slower ground. Like I said, it was soft, but maybe not as soft as described at Chepstow on Friday. And I think Ben Solo will certainly pick up a few more races over fences this winter for the Rebecca Curtis yard. On to the weekend's action, and two that caught my eye at Sandown have gone up in the handicap. Rock My Way, who was put up by me on the podcast, I thought he was going to take all the beating in the Berkshire National. I didn't think he'd win it as comfortably as he did. He was a very cosy winner indeed. I do think perhaps he had the best ride in the race. Conditions suited him best. Plenty struggled to get into it from off the pace. He was always ridden handy in behind Lord Accord. He's got a £9 rise now up to a mark of 140. He's a good jumper, gets in a good rhythm. He stays particularly well, and there'll be plenty of options for him heading into the season. But I just think a mark of 140, when you look back on all his form of last season, that's going to take a fair step forward, I think, to be winning competitive handicaps off that mark. So Rock My Way might struggle to feature on my list going forward, but he certainly is a young progressive horse. But for me, I think that £9 rise was a little bit steep from the handicapper in a race that perhaps fell apart behind him. Horse that's gone up in the handicap, but perhaps might still have a bit of juice in his mark, and it ties into Alexei, is Celtic Dino. He finished second at Ascot behind Woodoo. She's rated 154. He was conceding the £7 mare allowance to her. He's gone up £3 now to a mark of 147. That's the same mark as Alexei. Now, he beat Alexei in the Welsh Champion Hurdle at Chepstow, giving a bit of weight to that horse. I think it was £7 and 3 lengths. I think that suggests that there's still a bit of juice in this mark for Celtic Dino. The one thing you would have to say, though, is that this is a horse who's much better on a sounder surface, to the point that maybe if that rain hadn't come on Saturday at Ascot just to freshen the ground up a little bit, Tom Collins, who put him up, might have tipped the winner, because I think the slightly slower ground played to Woodoo's advantage. It just allowed it to pick him up and maybe just stretched his stamina over that trip of 2 mile 4. But I think off this mark 147, 2 miles, 2 mile 4 handicap hurdles, Celtino's still got juice in that mark. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if he were put away until the spring. Sam Thomas is becoming a very patient trainer, unless you've got a nice bit of ground through the early part of January at the likes of Kempton, which drains very well. Wouldn't surprise to see that Celtic Dino gets freshened up and returns in the spring for the spring festivals, where this mark of 147 might still see him on a winning mark. And then the final one to mention, and it's largely a horse that's irrelevant in terms of what his new handicap mark is Kabral Du Mathan. He's been put up £14 to a mark of 154 for a demolition job. Owned that 2 mile 4 handicap hurdle at Haydock. Was a very comfortable winner indeed. I put him up as a nap. I was pretty confident that he was very well handicapped off a mark of 140 on the basis that he'd run well in 2 mile handicap hurdles last year, always doing some good late work. He'd hand a wind up. He was into the Skelton's Yard, and they're absolutely flying. Plenty were sort of suggesting that maybe Harry Skelton could have taken a pull, and I would agree with that. But I think the way he rode him down over the last, and he absolutely pinged the last at Haydock, by the way, and flew up the running, suggested that they were pretty confident this is a graded horse, and that as such, handicap marks going forward weren't going to be something they had to worry about. I think the route for this horse looks fairly clear now. They've said they're going to try and turn him into a stayers hurdle horse. They've mentioned the Rail Keel. I think that looks a great spot for him to go next. And then from there, I'd imagine they then look to target the Cleve hurdle, give him some experience around Cheltenham over 3 miles. And if that goes well, then he's into the stayers hurdle division, which is a wide open division. It's lacking a real star. He's a strong travelling horse. You would perhaps just like to see him settle a bit and relax a little bit, race a bit behind the bridle, because generally stayers hurdle horses are lazy in their races. He is anything but. So I struggle to see him as a stayers hurdle horse, but certainly the Rail Keel hurdle, I think he'll make anything that turns up there go a good gallop to beat him. Horses coming down in the handicap, and again going back to the Sunday of the Cheltenham meeting. And the first is Queensbury Boy, who, like Off the Jury, made his debut for Mickey Bowen, having been bought out of that David Maxwell dispersal. Fairly cheaply bought after running poorly at Chepstow when being well hyped up by previous connections. He ran over fences in the 2 mile 4 novice handicap chase. He was a bit outpaced turning in and was staying on quite nicely down to the last when he got hampered by the fall of Jordan's Cross. His jockey sat up on him after that and just nursed him home. I just felt, even though he was at the back of the field going to the last, he was coming with a bit of a run. I'm not saying he would have won that race, but I think he'd have certainly got into the places, and certainly the way he was punched down to the last fence suggested that his jockey felt if he got a good jump and landed running, he could get into a challenging position. He's been dropped down £2 now to a mark of 129. I think that's looking like a fairly workable mark now, and he jumped pretty soundly throughout at Cheltenham, I should say. I think that Mickey Bowen will find a slot for this horse over fences in the not too distant future, off a new mark of 129. Also running on the Sunday and running in the Great Wood Herd, which, as I said, I thought was a pretty moderate affair, is Iberico Lord. Now, I could be looking at this through rose-tinted glasses, given that he was my selection, but he got no sort of ride at all, really, from Nico de Boinville. He was posted wide. He was never really put into contention. It looked very much like this was a typical sighter for something further down the line, which, of course, we always have to bear in mind when they're racing in these green and gold colours. I thought it was pretty generous of the handicapper to give him a pound back down to a mark of 138. That's just £4 higher now than the mark of 134 he won the 2023 or 2024 Betfair hurdle off. That came at Newbury on soft ground. Soft ground is essential to this horse. And if, as many of Nicky Henson's are needing, that was his first run just to put him right for something further down the line, I think Iberico Lord is starting to look like a very well handicapped horse for 2-mile handicap hurdles when the ground is soft. Gaye Legacy ran at Ascot on Saturday. She's been dropped £2 now to a mark of 114. Tom Simmons' mare always needs her first run of the season. She's a fairly short-coupled, fairly well-doing horse. She always carries a bit of condition, so it's no surprise to see her need this run. I thought she shaped well enough at Ascot. And interestingly, on each of the last 2 seasons, she's won on the second start of the season. Last season at Ludlow, that came off a mark of 116, so she's now £2 below that winning mark. So wherever she turns up next time, over 3 miles on soft ground, has to be a right-handed track. She's far better going right-handed. I'll be with Gaye Legacy, provided there's no outstanding rival in opposition. Kabral Du Mathan took apart that 2-mile 4 handicap hurdle at Haydock. One that caught the eye, and he had to have a good pair of eyes to find him, was Minella Missile. He was beaten a long way in 4th, but he did just plug on in the closing stages. He ran past tired horses. It's the first time he's done that for a while. The handicapper, though, still dropped him £3 down to a mark of 122. 2 years ago, he was winning a Grade 2 at Cheltenham and looking like a very smart horse indeed. He then was off the track, injured for a long time, returned in January last year off a mark of 138. They've done a pretty good job to get £16 off his handicap mark, giving him a fair few runs to do that, bearing in mind. But I just thought there were signs of life last time out, and the Evan Williams yard is always one to fear, particularly at Chepstow over the Christmas period. So if Minella Missile turned up there on slow ground, 2-mile 4 in a handicap hurdle, I think this new mark of 122 might well make him of interest. And then the final one coming down in the handicap is Titan Discovery for Robbie Llewellyn. He ran in the Betfair Stayers handicap hurdle at Haydock, a really strong race where it paid to be ridden prominently. The first 4 home were all up with the pace. Titan Discovery was dropped out the back, never really got a position either. Liam Harrison had to come wide, come from a long way back. Briefly turning in, it looked like he was going to run on, and then his run flattened out. This was his first start of the season. I think if you combine all those things together, there's reasons to give him a pass for this run, and he did finish a little bit tamely, but a pound back to a mark of 128. I think that's still a workable mark for Titan Discovery. He'll strip much fitter for this start next time out, and I'll be keen to see where they target him. A couple of horses who remain on unchanged marks, and again going back to Cheltenham on the Sunday, Tanganyika ran in the 3-mile 3 handicap chase, went at it from a long way out. Charlie Deutsch and Harry Skelton on Protectorat. They went very hard, sort of from turning down the back to the top of the hill, and then they went again down the hill. Tanganyika actually had Protectorat beat, but then rather left himself as a sitting duck, weakened in the closing stages. But his mark of 140 remains unaltered. He stays 4 miles. He copes with soft ground. Venetia Williams' yard is yet to really catch fire this season, although Royal Pagaille obviously ran very well at the weekend. I think Tanganyika off a mark of 140, slow ground, a stamina trip, certainly still looks like he's a fairly handicapped horse. Another who's on an unchanged mark and at a different point in their career is Diamond's Days for Joe Tizard. He was ridden by Freddie Gingell at Lingfield, stays on a mark of 91. This was a chase debut. He finished 4th. Going down to the last, it looked like it was going to be a fairly remote 4th, and it looked like Freddie Gingell sort of conceded that this was going to be a run for another day, but he landed from the last and then started to stay on quite nicely under hands and heels pressure. And I think all things considered, if perhaps Freddie Gingell had known the finishing effort he was going to get from the horse, he might have asked a little bit sooner and might have got an awful lot closer, because at the line he was only beaten 2 lengths. It looked like being around about 10 lengths going down to the last. So this mark of 91 for Diamond Days, Joe Tizard, still a maiden, but I thought there were signs of promise at this Lingfield Chase debut, and wherever he goes next, I'll be keen to follow him. 2 that ran at Ascot in a 2-mile handicap hurdle. on unchanged marks. And the first is Move It Like Me. He was very unfortunate, I should say. Got hampered by a faller, turning down the back, lost his position having raced prominently, and then had to work quite hard to get back into contention. And that paid a little bit late on, just weakened in the closing stages, but stays on a mark of 118. He's won off this mark over fences. It then went slightly awry over fences. He ran out a couple of times, didn't look to be in love with jumping the bigger obstacles. He's clearly got talent. He's clearly got a little bit of a quirk to him as well. But this mark of 118, I'm sure they'll find a winning opportunity for Move It Like Minnie. Also in that race was George's Lad for Emma Lavelle under Harry Cobden. He stayed on quite nicely over 2 miles, just got a bit outpaced turning in. He wants further than this, but he stays on a mark of 128. And I think that still looks like there's a little bit of movement in that mark when he steps back up in trip to around about 2 miles 4. And then one other from Ascot on Saturday, and it's Off the Jury, who made his stable and seasonal debut, now with Mickey Bowen having been bought for $250,000 off the David Maxwell dispersal sale. Previously with Alan King. For his final start, Alan King, he finished second in EBF final at Sandown. That's a traditionally strong race. And when you look at the form, Lawrence Baie, who won that race, has come out, won on chase debut, now rated 135. Meet Me By the Sea, who was back in third, has come out and won on chase debut, now rated 138. Off the Jury was between those two, giving them both £3. Stays on a mark of 131 for this return at Ascot in a novice hurdle. Hung left off the home turn, didn't look to be hard driven. The market suggested that it was perhaps going to be another day for him. I think Mickey Bowen's got himself a well handicapped horse here. They've got plenty of options. I mean, he is still a maiden. They could go and win a maiden hurdle, I suppose. But I suppose they'll look towards a handicap hurdle. This mark of 131, with that race behind him, a little bit more fitness on side, I think Off the Jury is a well handicapped horse. And then to wrap up, 2 new entries, both running in novice hurdles and running some way down the field. Well, certainly in the case of the first one, Wannabe for Tom Lacey, ran at Warwick and shaped, I thought, with a degree of promise down the back straight, looked to be latching onto the bridle and moving forwards, but then sort of blew up turning in, plugged on into 5th place. It's got a mark of 96. Looked like a really nice individual in the paddock beforehand. Big, strong horse. Tom Lacey does pick a nice individual. I thought a mark of 96, an opening mark, suggests that this is the horse that will be winning off this mark. 2 miles on slow ground, maybe a little bit further, we'll see him to better effect. He's a big horse. He's going to be a chaser of the future if he can get his jumping sorted out. So Wannabe is the sort of horse that if he was a decent each-way price on his handicap debut, I'd be keen to follow him in. And then the other one is Douglas Hyde for Rebecca Curtis. Now, this comes with a caveat that I'd like to see this horse have something to try and help him with his win, whether it's the fitting of a tongue tie on his handicap debut or off the benefit of a wind operation. He had some pretty good bumper form. He was placed in virtually all of his bumpers, particularly his Bangor bumper. The winner is rated 116. He's shaped with promise and a shade of disappointment on all of his hurdle starts so far. He travels strongly into the race every 2 miles, a couple of times, and then weakens out of it. And then when up did trip at Chepstow, 2 mile 3, the same thing really. He travelled into the race nicely and then weakened in the closing stages. He's a point-to-point winner. He stayed strongly in his bumpers. He was always doing his best work late on. I don't think stamina for the trip can be an issue here. I just wonder whether there's something holding him back with his wind. If that's the case, and you see him next time out with a tongue tie, which might just help the wind or off the benefit of a wind surgery, I think Douglas Hyde is a horse that can win races off a mark of 105. That's it for another episode. Hopefully plenty of horses in there that can win off their new marks. We've been going along pretty well in the last couple of weeks. I'll be back same time next week, where we'll be looking back at the Fighting Fifth, which sees the potential clash of Constitution Hill, the New Line, and maybe Amsterdam over from Ireland, as well as what's going to have happened in a very competitive looking Coral Gold Cup.